Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hello, good evening, and welcome along to the next 5 Yard Rush Flagship Show. I'm glad you're through it as ever, Dan, and as always, I am joined by the big man, Murf. How are you, sir?
Yes, mate, doing well. Combine is officially in the books. It's officially draft season. For people like Ollie, it's been draft season for months, but for those of us who have postseason interests, and for me, draft season is when the combine happens, and then you get this little bit with free agency now next week, which is buzzing. I cannot wait for next week. But yeah, I enjoyed the combine. I didn't watch much of yesterday's. I need to go and watch that, but really enjoyed some of the content that came out this year. Do you know what? I know people go on about the class, right? And the class isn't as talented, and we'll get into the class. I must say that the attitude and the people in the class, there's some phenomenal stories, but everyone came across really well. Like I tended to find that like the character level of people. I mean, there was a quarterback who was filmed clearing up all the rubbish left behind by the other quarterbacks at the combine and stuff like that, which I just thought, do you know what? That's the sort of content I subscribe to. It's just full of really good people, and everyone came across really well. And I thought, if regardless of what you think of the talent and what you see on tape, or whether you don't like someone or whatever, don't take away from the personality and the quality of the person that was represented, because for me, I think it was an all-time high in terms of the level of character of human being that was on offer.
Yeah, there's another video of Malik Willis, what appears to be donating goods out of his suitcase on the way into the combine and things like that. So it's always good to see. These young guys, it's always good to see, being humble. So you mentioned Oliver there. Guys, we are joined by NFL draft analyst at Pro Football Network. He's 1/3 of the College Chats podcast and contributor at the Touchdown. Oliver Hodgkinson. How are you, Oliver? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, guys.
That was quite an intro, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Is there anything you don't do?
Yeah. Cool. I feel a little bit bad because it's been over a year since I actually wrote anything for the Touchdown, and I've still got it knocking around in my Twitter bio. But we do a bit of podcasting for them still, so I'm not. I don't feel too bad about it. But yeah, plenty of work on.
I still call myself a fantasy football champion, and it's been years, so don't worry about it.
So. Speaking of which,
I think
I saw on there, right?
This came in the post this weekend. So those of you that are waiting on these, they are on their way to you. Some people have got them. Those who might be watching in the US, yours are on the way. There's special ones going out to all our listener league champions. But I was like, there's no way I'm not having one this year. There's no way I'm not having one and not wearing one. So I'll wear it special. Fun. But I mean, Ollie, you were supposed to actually be at the combine, weren't you? And then unfortunately with this bubble nonsense and threats of strike, it kind of cost you your opportunity to be there.
Yeah, we're supposed to be in Indianapolis this week. We're in the NFL Combine for Pro Football Network, but as you say, the original plan to have the participating prospects in a bubble really made it almost pointless from a media perspective. There's no ability to speak to these guys on the ground, and then when they threatened to boycott a lot of the drills, the NFL rescinded that bubble, but it was far too late in the day, just with a week left to go until the combine to get a visa to get out there. But it did mean I get to sit in the comfort of my own home and record 40-yard dash times and whatnot. So, it has some advantages.
And get to be on here and talk about it, because
exactly.
Because otherwise, we might have had another Hannah Wilkes situation. We had Hannah on, and she reported the Super Bowl we had the next day, and she was in a car busting out some tunes and then leaving a message saying, "I've got to go." It was like, okay, swift exit. So yeah, we might have had a similar pod, but no, it's good to have you here. It's been you've come and done a couple of drafts with us, but not actually had you on. So, and I thought with the combine, I couldn't think of anyone better to come on and break it down with us. So before we get into that, because it's an amazing story that you actually you're here in the UK, but you full time at PFN. This is your job. It's not a hobby. It's not something that you do for a little bit of cash aside. This is your career. So talk a little bit about how that opportunity came about, how you took that leap into doing this full time, and then also some of the things that PFN have got going on surrounding the draft. Whatever you can say, or if there's anything you can kind of preview and promo for us about what's going on there.
I'm sure we can have a little teaser on there. Yeah, it's quite simple, really. So I started off. I've been an NFL fan for years. My brother got me into the game. Really enjoyed. Once I understood the game, which I didn't start with, but once I got into understanding the game, started enjoying the game. Became a big NFL fan. Got into college football, and then sort of 3.5 years ago, answered a tweet looking for contributors to 99 Yards here in the UK. Started writing some college content there, and then started at Pro Football Network just as an unpaid contributor, just an avenue to get the work that I enjoyed doing, just covering college football and the NFL, just out there. And as the company's blossomed into a fully functioning, fully fledged media company in the States, we've had the opportunity to become a full-time NFL draft analyst, which just sometimes still don't believe it. When you go to fill out your occupation for various forms and whatnot, and it's like, oh, I go to write post office counter clerk on there, and it's like, oh, actually, that's not my job anymore. That's not what I do. So, yeah, it's been pretty cool, and I think for anyone who is watching, who enjoys football, enjoys writing about football, there's so many sites in the UK that you can get your feet wet, get your foot in the door, and if you're willing to work hard enough, there's always opportunities out there to grow, develop, and get to this sort of position. As to what we've got going on at PFN, just so much draft content. Like I say, the NFL Combine, we've been crushing all the measurements, analysis from every day, breaking out storylines as prospects have really shone. And then coming up in the next couple of weeks, we'll have the Pro Football Network NFL Draft Guide, first version of that, with over 170 scouting reports, lots of cool interactive content that we're super excited about bringing to people. If you go to any of the articles on profootballnetwork.com, pop your name and email address in there, you'll hear about when the draft guide goes live, and you can get a copy for yourself. And it's because it's an interactive version, we're going to have a couple of different versions before the draft where there'll be more scouting reports that land on there. There'll be things like the RAS, the relative athletic score from Math Bomb. That will all be all that information on there, all his cards. Big boards from myself, Ian Cummins, and Tony Pauly, and the 3 NFL draft analysts at Pro Football Network. So much content, and obviously draft interviews that we're doing with some prospects, which have been a pretty cool process, getting to know some of the guys behind the prospects. You talked about character and stuff in the introduction, and it's a great experience and a great honor being able to tell the stories of guys like Trey McBride, who's two mums, probably the first NFL draft prospect who raised by 2 mums, had a really tough upbringing in Colorado because of that, prejudice and stuff, and being able to hear their stories and tell those stories, as well as kind of explaining what they bring to the field. It's a pretty cool process.
Yeah, unbelievable. And actually, I remember watching this time last year, go back to PFN, you guys did a sort of a video series around the draft, and there was a little shot of you, a little shot of Ben, Rolf in there, who Ben's been on, and it's amazing because it did the video up until sort of draft night, and then as the picks were, the draft day itself, basically the meeting of don't tip the hand, we might know what's going to happen, but nobody tweet anything out until this point. And it was fascinating. I recommend anyone to go watch it on YouTube. In fact, I'll try and find a link and share it out, because it was really cool watching that. Just to watch a couple of people I know be part of that, but also it was just cool to watch because Tony's a well-connected guy, isn't he? He knows a lot of people. He knows it's a lot of information that he doesn't print and publish as well. There's a lot of things he doesn't tip the hand on, either because he can't or he won't or whatever, but fascinating, behind the scenes to PFN. So I recommend people go check that out, because that was awesome to see as well. Do you think this year will be bigger and better than last year's?
And we're hoping so. I mean, it's like, as you said, that video series that we were able to put together was pretty cool, and it's nice to be able to give people an insight into what happens in our processes. You know, particularly myself and Ian Cummins, who's my fellow draft analyst at Pro Football Network. We like try to be open and transparent and honest about our processes and things like that. So to be able to give people an insight into that is pretty cool. So yeah, hopefully lots more content like that to look forward to throughout the draft.
Awesome. Yeah, and you know, big fan of PFN, and you've had BJ on a couple of times. I've written at times for PFN, and I wouldn't rule that out in the future as well. Just a great organization. So glad you're part of it. Glad that we could have you on. But let's focus on the combine, because this is obviously what we want to know. For people listening, they're starting to maybe pick up, you know, dynasty season, starting to get into the rookies. This is the kind of point where people are probably slightly more than dipping their toe into this and probably getting their first kind of read on this. So in terms of the combine as a whole, and let's start at the top, the class as a whole, a lot of the headline is that in most positions, this class isn't as deep or as talented as years previously. There's one or two exceptions by position, but how would you sort of sum up this 2022 draft class, and just sort of some headlines of what we can kind of expect, say, in the early day one, early day two, what in terms of where we might see some quarterbacks, or maybe not names, but in terms of positions, what we're likely to see runs on early in the draft?
Yeah, I find it super interesting as a guy who has invested like 10 months. Our process started essentially as soon as the 2021 NFL draft finished, and even a little bit before then, because you're always conscious of guys that pop while you're watching film and thinking towards the draft class that they're going to be in. Will Anderson of Alabama, example, for next year's process. So it's a process that's like 10 months in the making, and there is this preconception that the 2022 NFL draft class is a bad class, and it's a preconception that is brought about by the murky nature of the quarterback class, because we're coming off the back of the 2021 NFL draft that was historic. Everyone remembers Trevor Lawrence and Trey Lance and Justin Fields and Mac Jones and Zach Wilson. That was historic. Like, that's, you know, isn't something that you should become familiar with, and something that you shouldn't expect. And certainly this NFL draft quarterback class this time around doesn't live up to that. It couldn't live up to it, let's be honest. So it's very murky, and that has kind of filtered down to the perception of the 2022 NFL draft class as a whole, which let me tell you is false. And if anyone who watched the NFL Combine this weekend will have heard the likes of Daniel Jeremiah and Rich Eisen talking about the depth of talent in this class, and it is incredibly deep at a number of positions, and it's top heavy as well in a number of positions. You mentioned what might we see in the first round of the 2022 NFL draft? Well, despite the quarterbacks being not quite of the caliber that we got last season, there's probably going to be still 3 or 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round of the 2022 NFL draft, just from a sheer supply and demand perspective. Now, everything might change with what happens with Aaron Rodgers. So you talked about free agency at the top of the show. Aaron Rodgers' situation, Russell Wilson's situation, that's going to dramatically alter the NFL draft landscape if anything does happen there. But 3 or 4 quarterbacks wouldn't be a surprise, regardless of whether there are 3 or 4 quarterbacks with first round grades. But in terms of what you're likely to see, aside from that, lots of edge rushers, so much pass rush talent in this class, so much cornerback talent in this class, lots of offensive line talent in this class, and lots of teams that need offensive line help as well. So, yeah, I think you're going to see a heavy mix of defensive players, couple of 3 or 4 quarterbacks. You're going to see a lot of secondary, and then a lot of offensive line to round out the first round. But it's a super deep talent, super deep class of talent, which you're going to pick up, I believe, NFL starters even as far as the early parts of day 3.
Okay. So you mentioned there quarterbacks, you're expecting potentially 3 or 4 first rounders. there is one particular talking point that's come out of the combine that we need to answer, I think. Kenny Pickett hand size. How relevant is that?
It depends who you ask.
Okay.
Kenny Pickett's hands are abnormally small. I'm not saying he's got abnormal hands. I'm not saying he's got abnormal hands. Let's put the brakes on any Kenny Pickett slander. But they are abnormally small. And it's been well documented as to the success or lack thereof of small-handed quarterbacks in the NFL. I know Murf actually brought up during the early part of Combine Week the amount of fumbles that Kenny Pickett has had throughout his career. I certainly think you look at this season and he's improved in that regard. And this whole season has been a vast improvement across all of Kenny Pickett's game. I know we released an article on Pro Football Network today. NFL leader and NFL analyst Mike Kay spoke to a number of NFL teams, particularly in the AFC, who have no concern whatsoever about Kenny Pickett's hands. So I think it's really it could come down essentially to a threshold issue with specific NFL teams. And we've talked about it on our Pro Football Network Premier NFL Draft podcast about certain teams have specific requisite thresholds for various things where evaluating talent's concerned. That might be one thing that rules Kenny Pickett out for a number of teams. But from what we're hearing, it doesn't sound like that is going to be a big issue. I spoke with Jeff Reinbold last week during his show, and he said, look, if the NFL was as simple as getting a guy with massive hands, you'd be down in the glove department store picking out a man with the biggest hands and sticking him under center in the NFL. So it's certainly a part of the puzzle where Kenny Pickett's concerned, but it's not the be-all and end-all. It's not the defining element of Kenny Pickett as an NFL draft prospect.
Okay. No, and I think that's fair. But, what I would refer to is, as you say about the thresholds, you're absolutely right, and I completely agree. We've had this with Kyler Murray is too small, but Kyler Murray was a Heisman Trophy winning quarterback. At the end of the day, he had proven on tape and had proven in his college career that he was good enough, and he's lived up to that billing of being a first overall QB. Yes, okay, he's not won a ring. He's still very early in the process, but he has taken that franchise significantly far forward. No one will ever say that Kyler Murray was a bad pick at 1 overall. The same way that you could have athletically gifted players who just don't pan out. James Winston's a great example of this, one of the best ever college ever quarterbacks, and that's not panned out. Nothing's ever set in stone. But I do think with Kenny Pickett, he took some step forward this year, but those numbers concern me. Not just the numbers, but the nature of them. If you go back and look at some of those fumbles, I do think that it comes down to, there's certain players who grip a significant portion of the ball. I know Scott Pioli at the Combine was talking about Tom Brady, who doesn't have particularly large hands, but he was saying that Tom Brady grips the ball a certain way that it covers most of the ball, but it's the amount of control that he gets. And I think with Kenny Pickett, the size mixed in with the level of control that he potentially has. And maybe that's something that he can learn. Maybe that's something he can get better at. Maybe it's something he's already been working at. But I think in isolation, if he didn't have many turnovers and many fumbles, it would just be kind of a jokey thing that people go, he's got small hands. But I think with that body of work on tape and seeing that actually some of those fumbles are because of the fact that potentially the way he grips the ball makes it a little bit difficult. He's going to have to find a way to make that work. And that's why he wears 2 gloves. And hopefully next level that will pan out for him. But yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting one. Where do you think Kenny Pickett goes in terms of before the Combine? It was before the Senior Bowl in particular. He was QB1 in the process. Debatable, but if you did a consensus of all mock drafts and you took an aggregated weighted score, he was the first QB going off the board. Where would you say that Kenny Pickett is, first of all, from you and your personal perspective, and then where you think he is likely to rank in this class of, let's say, the 5 QBs that are going to be touching that sort of first, early, second round kind of threshold?
Yeah, I think you touched on it. And let's not forget, Kenny Pickett was a Heisman finalist this year. So we talk about Kyler Murray. Yes, he was a Heisman winner. Yes, he did great things for Oklahoma, but he also had his issues at Texas A&M before he went to Oklahoma. And Kenny Pickett, after all, was a Heisman finalist and a record breaker in a college conference that boasted Deshaun Watson. I'm not sure if we can use Deshaun's name on this podcast, so apologies if not. As far as Kenny Pickett's concerned, he's a solid quarterback prospect for me. I don't think he's elite in any aspect of his game, but by contrast, he's not hand size apart. He doesn't have many massive flaws to his game. So I think for me, currently, and I'm still not thoroughly completed in my overall evaluations of all the quarterbacks, but he's my quarterback 3 at the moment. I think he's been commonly mocked to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it makes complete and utter sense for him to land in Pittsburgh, not just from a scheme fit perspective, but also from if you consider the teams that need quarterbacks and you consider the locations of those teams picking in the NFL draft. Unless there's a lot of trade activity on the day, which there could be before. Again, some teams desperately need a quarterback, and we've known and we've seen before that can be a real driver of trade activity. You only have to look at San Francisco 49ers last year trading up to get Trey Lance. But before that, you look at Carolina Panthers, probably Washington Commanders, and then the Pittsburgh Steelers as the 3 teams, and the Denver Broncos as well, as the 3 or 4 teams that really are in a position where they need quarterback talent. So I think Pickett fits in that sort of Pittsburgh Steelers sort of draft range right now. But again, anything can happen between now and then.
I think if Kenny Pickett goes to the Steelers, that's single-handedly the best situation that he can go to.
Yeah,
because sure. I think what you're saying is right in the sense of he's not elite at anything, he's not bad at anything. He can walk in day one, he can be the starter, he'll win the job there. But I think what he will get is a proven system with a long-standing, very underrated NFL coach, with long-standing coaches who know what they're doing. They will get the absolute best out of Kenny Pickett, and he's not going to be that risk of being in a one and done situation with, it's a new GM, but in terms of the coaching staff, it's pretty solidified there. With a similar scheme, Mike Tomlin can stay there as long as he likes, but he's not going to be on the hot seat if he misses the playoffs next year because he hasn't had a losing record since he's been there. So at the end of the day, it's a great situation for Kenny Pickett to develop those traits and become the best he can be. I think that's the best landing spot for, I wouldn't say all these QBs, but for him in particular, and Corral and Howell, I think those 3 would benefit the most from landing in Pittsburgh because I think they would get the most time and the most continuity to be the best versions of themselves. And we've
seen how important that is with Mac Jones landing in the New England Patriots. Mac Jones wasn't the best quarterback in the 2021 NFL draft class, but he's the one who had the most relative success last year just because of landing spot. And that's as key as anything where quarterback evaluation is concerned, and the success at the next level is where does this prospect land, because that can make or break even the best of quarterback prospects.
Yeah, because you've got Carolina there, and that's a difficult situation to go and get drafted because you've got a brand new OC coming in. You've got a head coach in Matt Rule. It's very public that he is on the hot seat. He might not last the year. He is, rightly or wrongly, he's on the hot seat. I don't think he deserves to be there given what he inherited, but that is the perception of the owner. David Tepper's put a lot of money in. He doesn't want to go there. That's a difficult situation to go to. Washington, okay, you got a great coach in Ron Rivera, but you have a system that just doesn't look like that's working, and that's going to need a bit of an overhaul. Plus, you've got all the background stuff, which that's going to play a part. The media is going to be on them a lot more. They are going to be, rightly or wrongly, judged in open session, open court, probably more than any other team this year, given the allegations in the Congress investigation. So, I think it's going to be tough for teams that go, or quarterbacks that go there. They're going to have to really do something special and absorb an extreme amount of pressure, because we saw it with Josh Rosen, right? Josh Rosen went to an environment where it was a bad team. Nothing really looked like it worked. He went to a coach who was one and done. He landed in the worst possible situation, and now he can't get a job in the NFL. I mean, he's what, third string at Atlanta, and he's not going to play many snaps in the NFL again. And for someone who had all that talent, that's what you say. The landing spot is so crucial. So, one person I want to talk about in this class is Desmond Ridder, because I'm very vocal about my passion for Desmond Ridder. I've got to be honest. If you'd asked me in December to rank the quarterbacks, I put him at quarterback 1, based on what I saw, based on where I think he can go. Do I think he's the number 1 today? No. In terms of what he will display on day 1, no. But if I look at the ceiling and I look at where he can take a team, and with his skill set, with time to develop in the right situation, I think he's got the greatest level of outcome. I do think Malik Willis has probably changed my mind a little bit on that, but I still don't think Desmond Ridder is very far behind. What are your thoughts on? Because he had a very good combine, Desmond Ridder. He really showcased a lot of the skill set that I felt very confident he would showcase. What do you feel his range of outcomes, and where do you think he's likely to be taken in the draft right now, if it was being drafted today?
Yeah, you're right. He put exactly what you'd expect on tape. It's probably the wrong word to describe a combine, but 4.52 official 40 time. You see that on tape. He's a long striding mobile quarterback who can escape the pocket and elude pressure comfortably with his athletic ability. Impressive explosion drill numbers. So 36-inch vertical jump and a 10'7" broad jump. And those two jumps obviously measure explosiveness. What do I think of Desmond Ridder? He's got an incredible arm. He's got a great arm that's been displayed throughout his Cincinnati career. We've just mentioned what he brings to the table in terms of being a mobile quarterback, which we've seen is trending towards being in the NFL with guys like Russell Wilson that we mentioned earlier. So he brings all that to the table. My concern with Desmond Ridder is he's probably the least accurate quarterback that I have evaluated in this process. And I don't feel like he's developed much in that regard during his 4 years in Cincinnati. Whereas you see with multiple other quarterback prospects where there has been a very clear progression and the ability to develop and eradicate some of the issues that have blighted their games. Now, I don't feel like in his 4 years at Cincinnati that Desmond Ridder has been able to do that. You also see on tape he can often be quite slow to start a game, so he takes a little bit of time to heat up in a game, which at the NFL level you're not going to get that opportunity to work your way into a game. You've got to come out firing. So there are those concerns with Desmond Ridder. I think depending on what happens earlier in the first round and depends what happens in free agency, there is the potential for him to sneak into the back of the first round. I don't like it. None of these quarterback prospects I've got a first round grade on. I feel like Desmond Ridder is probably the sort of QB5, QB6 of this NFL draft class, just because of the sheer accuracy issues that he's displayed during his college career.
But do you think those accuracy issues are a lot down to who he was playing with? If you look not at all, because you look at the wide receivers that Desmond Ridder has had to play with. Alec Pierce is an astounding wide receiver who will be a sort of day 2 NFL draft pick. You look at tight end Josh Wiley, who returned to school this time around. He's a great tight end prospect. They've had guys around him. He's had incredible offensive line talent there. I think the issues with his game are more due to him than the surrounding cast. Okay, because I think about Justin Herbert a couple of years ago out of Oregon, who going into his senior year, if he'd come out his junior year, would have been one of the top 2 prospects in the class that he He could have been, but it was kind of like there was a few decent quarterbacks in that 2019 class. He's like, I'm going to opt for 2020. Didn't have the best of 2020 seasons and sort of came on strong towards the end. But it was very clear that the concerns that people were having with Justin Herbert were from a coaching perspective around his footwork, where he drops, the way that, they establish play, the quarterback's coach and head coach want to play a 3-step drop. Most typically you see a 5-step drop in a quarterback, which obviously was shortening his motion, and therefore that accounted to it. Do you think with someone like Ridder, that could be a factor where a lot of what we have on tape is through the scheme which they played? Don't forget they were undefeated until the playoffs. So, what they did worked. But do you think that showing that explosiveness and showing what he did in some of the drills, he could alleviate some of those accuracy concerns based on what he did at the combine, or do you think it's just not enough?
Look, anyone can be developed by the right person, and I think the thing with Justin Herbert, a lot of his stock was it was A, scheme specific, and B, it was personality specific as well, which were wrong. I wasn't someone who was on that bandwagon about Justin Herbert not being a leader, and you saw at the Senior Bowl when he was there, he was very much a vocal leader, interviewed very well with the media. Obviously interviewed very well with teams as well. So, and that's the sort of character we already know that Desmond Ridder is. He's been a clear leader for Cincinnati. He's always been very open in communication with the media while he's been there. So that element is not quite the same as Justin Herbert. If you get anyone with a good quarterback coach who can improve some of the mechanic aspects of the game, then there's a chance, because he has got some of those baseline traits that you look for in terms of NFL talent. He has got that arm. He can throw over a mountain. He can maneuver. So there's hope for Desmond Ridder. I just think you would like to have seen more development out of him in terms of curing some of those accuracy issues and some of the pocket presence stuff that he's demonstrated.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. So moving on from a lesser known QB class, we move on to the running backs. So there appears to be two almost leaders here in Isaiah Spiller and Breece Hall kind of stand out. I think sitting on his own just a little bit below, we've got Kenneth Walker. Is he as good as those two? Can he get to that level?
I think he can get to that level, yeah. He's Breece Hall did himself the world of favours this weekend at the NFL Combine, and Isaiah Spiller did not, by not participating. Now, he'll go to, and this is a conversation we've had multiple times in the last couple of weeks, where Combine opt-outs have been discussed. If you're in essentially the biggest job interview of your life, which the NFL Combine is, and pro days are, this process as a whole, you want to put yourself in the very best light. And someone like Isaiah Spiller, for example, will go to the Texas A&M pro day on his home field or home training facility with the players that he's used to be around. He'll have very specific things put into his pro day script that will mirror what he's done at Texas A&M. So that gives him the opportunity to put his best foot forward. But what he does by not performing at the combine is falls behind like Breece Hall. Breece Hall's gone out there, blown the opposition away by really showcasing not just the testing, but the on-field stuff as well. And Kenneth Walker as well. He ran faster than Breece Hall. He is the explosiveness and the agility drills he was fantastic in. A lot of what Kenneth Walker does well, he does exceptionally, and it's been great to see this year at Michigan State. You're talking about a kid who can cut without any discernible drop off of speed at all. Like, that's watching Kenneth Walker cut is just, it's insane. I don't know how the guy moves laterally without losing any speed whatsoever going forward. It's just incredible, and that's what you want to see out of your running back, right? I think the issue for him is sort of 5'9", 211. He hasn't demonstrated the physicality as a blocker that someone like Isaiah Spiller certainly has at Texas A&M. He hasn't showcased the level of pass catching ability that like Isaiah Spiller and Breece Hall have done during their college careers. So as an overall evaluation, he probably falls just slightly short of those two guys right now. But there are concerns with Isaiah Spiller. He's not particularly fast, which when it comes to the NFL, is he going to be able to get big chunk plays, rip off big chunk plays? That's an unknown. I really like Isaiah Spiller. I think he's the best running back in the class with what he does. His footwork, his vision are incredible. He does bring the ability to be physical as a blocker. He can catch the ball effortlessly out of the backfield. But I think those three running backs are really, really tight, like wafer thin between the three of them. Off the top of my head on my big board, I think there's like 7 positions between those 3 guys. So that's how close they are.
Yeah, one of the questions I wrote for Fantasy Pros on the eve of the Combine was, can Kenneth Walker stick with those 2? Because you're talking about a player who divides opinion. I'm not as big on Kenneth Walker as others, but his Combine performance was as good as he could have hoped, and I think he has alleviated some of the doubts on there, and I think he would have earned himself more fans than detractors based on his Combine performance. So I think you're right. The question was it likely we were going to see these guys be early day 2 second round picks? And I think there's a chance that all 3 of these guys could go in the second round. I can't see anyone else going in the second round other than these 3. Who would you say is sort of the best of the rest here? Because there is a big drop, really, when you go down from it's very similar to last year's class, where you had a couple of guys sort of elite at the top, and then you had this sort of a bit of a drop down. So who are some of the guys we're looking at, 3rd, 4th round running backs who could potentially have an impact in the NFL next season? Obviously, landing spot dependent.
I really like Rachaad White out of Arizona State. I don't think there is a smoother runner of the ball in this 2022 NFL draft class. I also don't think there's many better pass catching backs than Rachaad White. He's had to, that's kind of what Arizona State do. He's had to be able to catch the ball. He's been just effortlessly smooth as a rusher. He's just knife through butter stuff. Showcase speed at the Combine, 4.48 second 40-yard dash. He's a great kid as well. Fantastic journey. If you have the opportunity to look into Rachaad White's backstory, he's been all over the country just trying to get to this point. And he's an easy kid to root for. He's an incredible, talented football player. And playing in the Pac-12, he's the sort of kid that doesn't get a lot of light shone on him. We've seen it before with Pac-12 prospects who they just don't get the same level of exposure because they play at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. Rachaad White for me is a guy I absolutely love. Rachaad.
I'm with you 100%. I have him as sort of the best of the rest for me. I think, as you say, the going through multiple JUCOs, trying to find a home, just trying to play, the desire and willingness to fight for it, you can't teach that. You can't teach it. And that's going to carry him through those difficult situations where you fumble, you get taken out of the game. Because running backs, if you play for certain coaches, you could be punished by not playing. And he's someone that will deal with that in the right way, not the wrong way, for sure. Anyone else that kind of sticks out for you as potential sort of 3rd round-ish players who could potentially have an impact in the right landing spot, 4th round maybe?
There's a few guys who are really knocking on the door of that early day 3 range. And two of them that really impressed me at the Combine were Tyler Goodson out of Iowa and Zonovan Knight out of NC State. I absolutely love both of these guys, but they've kind of Zonovan in particular, he started this season really well, but kind of faded as the season progressed. But he brings you exceptional value because he's a special team standout as well. See a couple of really nice kick returns this season for that kid. And Tyler Goodson is, he creates so well. In terms of, he's been nicknamed Spin Shady because of the spin moves he pulls off. He cuts really well. He can stiff arm with the best of them. And then he ran really well at the Combine as well. 4.42 40-second yard dash, which I didn't see coming out of the kid. So I think he's kind of put himself back in that conversation as a sort of potential early day 3 guy. Kyron Williams out of Notre Dame, who had an absolute shocker of a Combine. But as we kind of continually try and impress upon people is the combine is just a small piece of a very big picture. The issue for Kyren Williams is he's been an explosive runner for Notre Dame in terms of being able to crank off 70, 80-yard rushing plays. But you didn't see any of that out of his drills at the combine. He's a great pass catching running back. He's a great great blocker as a running back as well, which again, it ticks all those NFL boxes. The concern is that NFL teams will completely wipe him off their boards based on the testing numbers. If we go back to those requisite numbers that some NFL teams just have set in stone for guys, and hopefully Kyren Williams can impress at the Notre Dame Pro Day and kind of rehabilitate his draft stock.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also a big fan of Pierre Strong out of South Dakota State.
Now we're talking.
He's someone I'm a big fan of and written about to a degree. I think if he was at a better school, he'd be right up there at the top of the class. I mean, who doesn't love a running back who can throw touchdowns? If nothing else, he's got everything in his game. He can do anything.
He has, and he weighed in a little bit heavier at the combine as well than expected, because that was one of his big the big concerns about Pierre Strong was an FCS running back who was a little bit lightweight. Would he be able to hold up to the rigors of the NFL? And he weighed in a little bit heavier, set the fastest time of the combine, 4.37 40-yard dash. Just had a really impressive performance. Looked smooth out there on the field, and he's been hyper productive. Over 1,600 yards this year, 18 touchdowns. Not used much in terms of the passing game, but he has showcased good natural hands as a pass catcher. So, yeah, Pierre Strong's a guy who, if people don't know him, they should go and check out his tape because he is fun.
And he bulldozes linebackers for fun. He is not afraid of contact. He will just run over. If he gets into the secondary, those DBs are going to be an absolute horror show because he will just flatten anyone. I'm a huge fan. I really hope he lands somewhere great and we get to see him perform at the next level and I really hope he goes early because it'd be great to see a guy, come out of South Dakota State and perform well. I really hope that happens.
I had the opportunity to speak to his quarterback as well, Chris Owadokin, and he spoke even more highly than myself and you have just done. He spoke about how his character off the field as well. So, yeah, a real great kid.
Yeah, big
cool.
fan.
So wide receivers then. We talked earlier about Kyren Williams and how it didn't quite go right for him, but another guy who had a bad combine appeared to be David Bell. Didn't seem to fall his way, did it?
It wasn't the greatest showing from David Bell. One of the slower 40-yard dashes, 4.65. Didn't test particularly well in terms of the explosion drill. So 33 into the 9-10 broad jump, which just not ideal. What I'd say on David Bell is that isn't his game. But he isn't a speed threat. He isn't a guy who is going to burst past defensive backs. He's got a little bit of that to his game. But what he does so well is the physical element. He'll go up there in contested catch situations. He'll shove a guy into the dirt quite happily on his way downfield. He had a better 3-cone drill, which the 3-cone drill is a measure of agility. How agile you are, how you can change direction in the open field. And he had a better 3-cone drill than guys like Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson, who are well renowned for their after the catch ability. So I think that was important to bear in mind for David Bell because that is his game. It's the physicality, what he can do after the catch in terms of breaking tackles, changing direction. But yeah, I think it will cause a little concern for NFL teams. It could impact his stock because he's a guy who, despite being productive, this wide receiver class is so deep of talent that he's kind of fallen almost off the radar before the combine, and now he's on the radar for all the wrong reasons.
Would you say that this impact has pushed him out of potentially second round contention and potentially further? Because there are some guys who were behind him who I think are like Christian Watson. I know, very different type of receiver, right? But Christian Watson was somebody pre-Senior Bowl no one was really talking about, has a phenomenal Senior Bowl, has a great combine. And now people are looking at Christian Watson thinking, Yeah, that's a guy I want on my team because he just makes plays.
I saw Christian Watson described as a lock top 50 pick earlier on, which I completely agree with him. My last mock for Pro Football Network, my last 4-round mock, I had Christian Watson going 44th overall to the Cleveland Browns. I'm not convinced he even makes it that deep. But we shouldn't call any player a lock. But we're full of uncertainties and stuff, especially with 2 months out. But he's an incredible talent that it's just people are only just waking up to, like you mentioned. He's been doing that for years. This is what Christian Watson is, and the 40-yard dash time just kind of again, it's one of those you go back. It's a clarification and confirmation because that's what you see on tape with this kid. He's a truly astounding talent. But in terms of David Bell, it's difficult. It depends how many wide receivers fly off the ball because plenty of teams need them. There are plenty of great receivers. There were plenty of receivers who put in great performances at the combine. And like I said before, he was kind of a guy who was sliding almost off the radar before. So there is always that potential that he could stumble and fall out of the second round.
So similar to the quarterbacks, there seems to be sort of 5 running backs that kind of separate themselves a little bit. I don't think as far as the quarterbacks. I think that you could go 10, 12 deep in this wide receiver class, and I think you've got a really productive NFL starter and all the way down at wide receiver 12, wide receiver 13 in this class, maybe even further than that with some of the guys who are really producing. But the 5 at the top, the 2 from Ohio, Burks, Drake London, Williams. I mean, in terms of those guys, how do you view them? How do you feel their combine went? And obviously, someone like London didn't participate at the combine because he was hurt. So, that hurt him a little bit? Or how do you think it kind of shakes out now, post-combine, as to where those sort of 5 are? Are they all still likely to go in the first round? And what do they need to do to really help their chances?
I think Garrett Wilson kind of separated himself this week as the best wide receiver in this 2022 NFL draft class. We have a conversation, me and Ian Cummins at Pro Football Network. We meet every month to bash out our top 50. And Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson have been pretty much since we first sat down in August. They've been the 2 guys that we couldn't really put a cigarette paper between to start with. And we talk about it every week. I was always a big Olave fan. I've always been a big fan of Chris Olave's game. But I think Garrett Wilson, through the course of this season, has kind of separated himself a little bit from Chris Olave. He's just better at the catch point. He's more physical than Chris Olave. But at the same time, he's a 3-level threat with his route running ability. And then you come to the combine, and Chris Olave is a track star who... that's his hallmark of his game, is that he's faster than Garrett Wilson if your argument's between those 2. And Garrett Wilson runs faster in the 40. So for me, I think Garrett Wilson helps solidify himself. Drake London, you mentioned, he didn't participate because he's still returning from the horrific injury that he suffered during the season. Drake London is my favorite wide receiver prospect. In terms of just being a sheer freak of size and athletic ability, just kind of unparalleled in that term of how big yet deceptively athletic he is. Former basketball player who you can see that influence on the football field. I think he still led the Pac-12 in yards per catch, having not played for half the season.
I compare him to Mike Evans a little bit in terms of just that sheer size, catch radius. It's the fact that you can chuck it up there, go out and get it. He will be a huge red zone threat to somebody next season. He's going to be some quarterback's best friend when he gets drafted because he'll get anything. You're not outmuscling him.
Yeah, the Mike Evans comparison is one has kind of been earmarked for Drake London for a couple of seasons. A lot of people see him as that kind of player, and it's easy to see why. Then Jameson Williams again couldn't participate because of the ACL injury. Phenomenal prospect who it remains to be seen if he returns to full throttle, because when you're your game is predicated on the speed and your ability to cut at that speed, like Jameson Williams is. When you've had a serious ACL injury, there will always be those sort of niggling doubts as to how you return from that. And Treylon Burks, he's been slammed a lot for his combine performance, but for me, it was kind of almost what you expect. Similar to David Bell. His game, he isn't a 4.3 guy. At the end of the day, he's 6'3", 225 pounds. He's not going to run a 4.3 40-yard dash like some of these guys. So I think he'll cause some people to go back and kind of reevaluate, because I know, particularly for fantasy purposes, he's been a huge fantasy wide receiver one darling throughout this process. I think that might cause people to go back and reevaluate. But he does so much. He brings so much to the table in terms of his game as a physical presence, in contested catch situations. He brings that after the threat ability. He can run the ball out of the backfield. So he's an exciting prospect who I don't think we should really hang our hats on his combine performance in terms of his NFL draft evaluation.
No, I think that's fair. And then you've got some guys underneath that: Dotson, Pickens, Sky Moore, Calvin Austin, who a lot of people, myself included, thought he could threaten the combine record. We've talked about Christian Watson, David Bell. I mean, what are your thoughts on these guys? Mechie the third as well. There's so many guys here who, again, all productive, could all be, could all earmark and make themselves out to be great wide receivers in the NFL. What do you think about their chances of success? And is there anyone that you keep an eye on, think could rise up boards, or anyone you think could fall down boards?
Yeah, just that point illustrates how great and deep this NFL draft wide receiver group is. We talked at the top of the show, like, this is a good draft. It's an exceptional draft, despite what people think. And the wide receiver class is a real great example of that. And you mentioned Sky Moore there. He's a real ascender, a guy who is just explosive in all directions. Is a great quote that I heard to describe Sky Moore, and I think it's perfectly apt, because that's what he does. And he's got excellent ball skills. He's tough for his size. He's only 5'10", weighs under 200 pounds, but he is tough. Had an impressive combine. 4.41 was faster than I think some people thought he would run. So I think Sky Moore is a guy that is underappreciated in this draft process, who probably goes day two comfortably, potentially in the second round. I know there's people who think he'll be a first rounder. I just think this class is too deep for him to break the first round, but I would not be surprised to see him in the second round. And then you've got an absolute, I can't even think of the right word to describe it, day three guys. There's going to be a load of late round wide receivers who are going to come in and potentially make an impact in the NFL. I really like Josh Johnson out of Tulsa. He's a quick guy with special teams experience, which, when you're looking at day three guys, that's what you want. You want guys with special teams experience who can come in and contribute there as they work their way to the NFL and acclimatize to the speed. Javon Hiley out of Coastal Carolina. He's a really well-rounded prospect that not a lot of people talk about. He's been productive, but because he's competing with Isaiah Likely, the tight end, he doesn't get a lot of light shone on him, but he's got great hands, impressive length, catch skills, ability to track the ball are impressive. He's quick. And then finally, just from a wide receiver perspective, we saw Isaiah Weston out of UNI really tear up the combine, another FCS wide receiver. He's got excellent catch radius. He's an incredible athlete. He's really flexible, great speed, and just developed as a real late round riser, I think, in this class.
You've missed off my favourite late round riser there. Mike Woods.
Yeah, Mike Woods can do a little bit. He's a guy that's been hurt by the Oklahoma situation this season, for sure.
Yeah, he was phenomenal at the combine. If you haven't had a chance, go and look at some of the catches he put together in the drills, because some of them were outrageous. Like, there was the one with the long extension. There's one on the sideline where he had to twist and jump and bounce. I've been a big fan of Mike Woods. I luckily talked about him before the combine as watch out, because no one was mocking him anywhere. No one was mocking him in seven round drafts. He wasn't. I think his average mock position was like 330, 340. Yet this guy was invited to the combine. He was invited for a reason. He is a good prospect, and I think he did himself a world of good. I really hope Mike Woods goes higher in drafts than the UDFA. I really hope someone takes a chance on him, because I think there's a great kid in there somewhere.
Fair. How about tight ends then? Moving on again, we've got many coming out. Obviously, last year we had a standout generational talent joining the NFL. How are we looking this year? You mentioned a couple.
Yeah, there's not a Kyle Pitts like generational talent at the tight end position, but again, kind of people get bored of hearing the same thing. But it's a deep class of tight ends, and I don't think anyone separated themselves at the combine. You've got guys like Isaiah Likely and Trey McBride at the top out of Coastal Carolina and Colorado State. Greg Dulcich out of UCLA, a guy Daniel Jeremiah spoke very highly of during the coverage of the combine, if you've seen that. So there's three guys right at the top. Jalen Weidemeyer out of Texas A&M. There's a whole host of guys. Cole Turner out of Nevada. What I think at the combine, rather than separate at the top, I think some guys really pushed themselves into the back end of that conversation. Guys like Jelani Woods out of Virginia, who is 6'7", over 250 pounds, has got ridiculously long arms, and then ran an absolutely blazing 40-yard dash time. And he's had a great process. The combine was just kind of the icing on the cake, because of the East-West Shrine Bowl, he really showcased what he can do there. Incredible week of practice where he consistently showed that he was able to separate with the ease that you would not expect from a guy who is a big old dude. And then it got a touchdown in the game at the East-West Shrine, came into the combine, blew the doors off the 40-yard dash. Some of the explosion drills he was really good at as well. Looked great on field as well, looked really fluid, showcased his ability as a pass catcher. I think Jelani Woods is a guy who really could force his way into the conversation in day three, for a guy who wasn't really being talked about much before the process.
Absolutely.
That's why it's there, I guess. That's why it's there. So we mentioned at the top of the show as well, moving on, offensive linemen. There's a lot of skillful guys coming out. He isn't probably the most sexy thing to look at, especially on a fantasy point of view, the open lineman getting drafted. But tell us, who we got? Who's coming out? Who's there to look out for?
There's, again, so much talent. You're going to see potentially 6 offensive tackles, I think, in the first round of the 2022 NFL draft. Alabama's Evan Neal, potential first overall pick. Big, strong, athletic, didn't perform at the combine. He's going to test at the Alabama Pro Day. And that really opened the door for NC State's Ikem Ekwonu to showcase his resume, his job interview for the first overall pick, because the minute that guy walked up to the podium on Thursday, or Wednesday, sorry, when the offensive line guys went to the podium, he looks like a first overall pick. The dude is absolutely massive, real muscular build to him. He's incredible. And then he went out, ran a decent 40-yard time for his size, looked really fluid on the field, like a dancing bear. And he brings that savagery that you'd expect from him. This is what it looks like, right? The wave drill where they have him lay on the floor.
Yeah. I'm with you.
You've got it.
You've said it. It's in my head now. That's all I'm going to say. 100%. Dancing bear.
Dancing bear. But he plays with the savagery of a bear, man. He's you watch some of Ikem Ekwonu's highlights, either at guard or at tackle, and he will absolutely run a man into the ground. I think Bubba Bolden, the safety out of Miami, is superb. And Bubba Bolden, the safety out of Miami, he's still got Ikem Ekwonu's hand imprinted on his face and the dirt and the turf on his back from him absolutely running him over. So you've got Charles Cross out of Mississippi State, slender, athletic, nasty. He's a great dude. Trevor Penning, Tyler Smith really impressed me. I know he's a guy that a lot of people have been talking up as a first-round prospect. He looked the part out on the field when the offensive line took to the field there. And my guy out of Boston College, Zion Johnson. Guard with left tackle experience and Senior Bowl exposure at the center position. He'd play anywhere you want him on the offensive line. Really intelligent, athletic, strong. Led all offensive linemen on the bench press with 32 reps at the combine. This offensive line class is incredible.
I'm not going to lie. He was someone who I was hoping wasn't going to do as well at the combine, because I was kind of hoping he would fall down to the Buccaneers late second round. That's not going to be the case now, I don't think, because I thought he'd be a great replacement for Ali Marpet. I thought he would slot him in that line really well. That flexibility, really felt that he would for me would be the choice to replace Ali Marpet, but I don't think that's going to happen now unless you take him at 27, which that could be tempting, but I'm not sure if that's the way that the front office will go.
I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't even make it that far.
Wow. Yeah, he had a good combine, and he definitely made him a name for himself, which is what you want. I think this class is great. I mean, the 2020 class is heralded for the talent at the top end of that class. I'm a big Tristan Wirfs fan. I was a big fan of his when he got drafted. I was even happier he came to Tampa. I don't know how he fell to 13 in that class. Mekhi Becton, Andrew Thomas.
There's so many similarities when you actually look at those classes. Like the first round center in Michigan, Cesar Ruiz, that's your Tyler Linderbaum in 2022. Loads of day 2, day 3 guards, plenty of them in this class. Yeah. And then, like you say, Andrew Thomas, Tristan Wirfs, Mekhi Becton, 6 offensive tackles in that first round, and it would not surprise me to see it again.
No, it's just the fact that you probably have a consensus one in Evan Neal. I don't think anyone is going to say that he's not the best in this class. Well, maybe I'm wrong. Are you going to surprise me here and say he's not the best in this class?
I think Evan Neal's the best. I love Evan Neal. I think he is the best offensive tackle. There are people whose opinions I respect very highly who have Ike Mekwonu as the top offensive tackle in this class.
See, I think with the Jaguars, I just don't think you can take Evan Neal at 1. But I can understand why he's the best player in the class. But I think with what the Jags need and what they need to do, but we'll see what happens. Let's move to the other side of the ball, because again, there's potentially 2 of the top 3 picks, edge rusher and defensive line. Again, this is a really deep edge rusher and defensive line class as well. If you're looking to build through the trenches and you were waiting for this class, and I'm thinking of like the Eagles here, for example, with all those picks, this is a good year to do it.
Yeah, it's a great year to need defensive line talent, whether it's edge rushers, whether it's defensive tackles, whatever you need, you're going to be able to get it in this class. And it's quite funny because you heard before this season people say, "Oh, well, it's not got the Chase Young, it's not got those sort of, it's not top heavy." Well, this class has emerged as being exceptionally top heavy from an edge rush perspective. And you're right, we could see 2 of the first 3 selections being edge rushers, because you've got Aiden Hutchinson, you've got Kayvon Thibodeau, you've got Trayvon Walker emerging out of Georgia, Jermaine Johnson out of FSU, David Ajabo out of Michigan, George Karlaftis, who doesn't get the appreciation in the class because he's not showy like those guys. He's not going to do you with a spin move like David Ajabo, but trust me, George Karlaftis is an incredible defensive end prospect in this class. There's tons of them. You keep on going, even beyond those to sort of day 2, day 3. You're going to be able to get great pass rushers off the edge. Trayvon Walker, you could plug him in at defensive tackle in the NFL as well. And then, we've seen Jordan Davis absolutely blow up the combine. We've seen Devontae Wyatt, Travis Jones out of UConn. So many. Matthew Butler out of Tennessee is a guy no one speaks about, but he's an incredibly explosive defensive tackle. There's just so much defensive line talent in this class. It's insane.
There's starters that are going to go in the 3rd and 4th round here. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. There's a guy I really like out of Coastal Carolina, Jeffrey Gunter, who versatile defensive lineman. No one talks about him. Apparently, the NFL is higher on him than what the outside media is. And they should be, because he's an incredible athlete, incredible length, versatility to play across the defensive front. He's a guy that will start in the NFL. You're probably going to get on the early part of day 3. That's how stacked this class is.
Yeah, it's huge. I really, like I said, think it's a great class to go and build your trenches. If I had to tell anybody where I thought this class was probably weakest, most people would say quarterbacks, which I don't necessarily believe. I think it's linebacker. Compared to what we've had over the last half dozen years, I think there's two very good linebackers. But I think, and after that, you've got a lot of potentially good, but I don't think you're going to see as many linebackers come off the board early in this NFL draft as we have done in previous years. Am I unfair to think that, or?
Let me let you into a little secret. I hated this linebacker class when I was summer scouting back in sort of May and June. Absolutely hated it, and I same as you. I thought there was no talent in this class. I actually think there is. I think there's a lot more talent than people give it credit for, and a lot more talent than I gave it credit for just like 10 months ago. Nakobe Dean and Devin Lloyd are standout guys. Like Nakobe Dean is a different beast. He's going to get knocked a little bit because of his size. But I think he's showed this season that he's developed on some of the issues that his size gave him in 2020. I saw a guy over the summer who he really struggled to overcome more powerful and bigger offensive linemen, especially on the interior, where he seemed to have really figured that out this year. Seemed to play with a little more physicality, seemed to use his brain a little bit better to defeat interior offensive linemen rather than trying to rely solely on physicality. So I think Nakobe Dean, Devin Lloyd out of Utah, they're your standout guys. And then behind them, and you look at Wyoming's Chad Muma, who is like a Logan Wilson part 2. Came out of a similar school, similar athletic profile, but I think Chad Muma is better. I think he's not considerably better, that's probably not fair, but I think he's considerably better than people give him credit for. Such an intelligent player, very athletic for his build. He tested well, looked great on the field, was impactful at the Senior Bowl, kind of almost teach tape how he played practice at the Senior Bowl. And then there's Christian Harris, hyper athletic guy who, hilariously, I was talking to an Alabama beat writer last week. Kid used to be a defensive back, but his worst element of his game is actually in coverage. Now he's a linebacker, but really athletic, coming downhill, hit you in the mouth. Watch Georgia, the national championship game against Georgia. He was his best game I think he had for Alabama. Saved his best till last. Brian Asamoah out of Oklahoma, similar, really athletic, heavy hitting, sideline player. Leo Chenal out of Wisconsin, same deal, hyper athletic, come downhill and hit you in the mouth, really intelligent guy. He's a guy who some people are talking about as a first round prospect. I don't really see it myself. I think he's a day 2 guy. But again, there's more guys out there at linebacker than I certainly thought originally, and a lot of people expect.
Yeah, I think it's just a case of, I think there's 2 standout linebackers, as you say. I think everyone else you're looking at day 2, day 3 guys. I just don't see many going in the second round as potentially we have done in previous years. I think you're looking at, I can't see more than 5 going in the top 2 rounds personally, but I'm not the expert here, but whereas you're looking at previous years, and I think there was a lot more depth. But that's what happens, isn't it? Sometimes you just get these classes that are a little bit thinner than others. But a class that perhaps isn't thin is the D-back class. This looks deeper than it has been for a very long time.
Yeah, a really impressive class. And I should clarify, when we were talking about offensive line before, Evan Neal, I think, will go first overall. He's not my first overall prospect. My first overall prospect is Kyle Hamilton, the safety out of Notre Dame. And now we've got to the defensive back class. He didn't test. He didn't test. He's incredible, right? He's incredible. He didn't test well yesterday in terms of the 40-yard dash. Which you shouldn't hang your hat on that anyway. How many times do you run in a straight line for 40 yards on a football field? His 40-yard dash was, when you go back and watch it as well, a little all over the place. He nearly ran out of the track running the 40. And if you're running 47 yards to complete 40 yards, you are going to be slower than most other people. And a kid who's coming off a season-ending injury as well. So this is his first time fully going at it. He looked great on the field. Rest of his measurements, explosive testing was excellent. Flip on the Notre Dame tape from any point of Kyle Hamilton's career. He's insane. You don't see a kid that is 6'4", 220 pounds, fly around the football field from the safety position, sideline to sideline, north and south, hit you in the mouth, physicality, just an incredible prospect. So he's my number one overall prospect, defensive back. And then, the cornerbacks, Derek Stingley Jr., Andrew Booth Jr., Ahmad Gardner, the two Washington kids, Trent McDuffie and Kyler Gordon, Darion Kendrick out of Georgia, former Clemson cornerback. You could just keep on going and going and going with these cornerbacks and safeties as well. We saw Georgia's Lewis Seen yesterday absolutely put on a show, really fast 40, blew the competition away with some of the explosion drills, looked fantastic on the field, and that's what that kid has been for Georgia. He's been incredible. He kind of gets chastised, castigated, whatever you want to call it, for the hit on Kyle Pitts, where people wanted him banned. Florida players wanted him banned from college football for life. That's the kind, he hits with incredible jaw-dropping, just horrible physicality, for want of a better word. But it's beautiful to watch, and he's going to make an incredible safety in the NFL.
In terms of breaking this down from a DB class, because again, it is stacked. You've talked about who you would have at the top there. There's potentially 5, 6, 7 DBs that could go in this sort of first, very early second round. Too many?
Yeah, I think first, early second. I think there's probably 5, 6, 7. First round, you're probably looking at 5 guys. I think for the first round at the cornerback position, and then some early day 2 guys thrown in there as well. And again, a raft of guys that are coming out on the outside rails from the combine, the Senior Bowl, the All-Star game process. You look at a guy like Zion McCollum out of Sam Houston State, who absolutely blew the roof off Lucas Oil Stadium yesterday at the combine, and he's flown under the radar because he's an FCS kid out of Sam Houston State, but 54 career breakups, 13 interceptions, plays real fast, plays real physical, intelligent kid. And he's going to start enforcing himself on this class as well.
There's one player who is potentially being mocked quite consistently to the Buccaneers, who I really don't want the Buccaneers to pick, and that is Elam out of Florida. Nice kid, got all the size attributes that you would want from a cornerback, but he just makes too many mistakes. I saw this, I'm a big Gator fan. I saw it too often, and I think back to, and probably not the right way to think about things, Vernon Hargreaves coming out of Florida and being drafted by the organization. There's far too many similarities for me between those two players. It didn't work. I don't want us to go back into the well and go for Elam if indeed we go corner in the first round. I just don't think it's a good fit from a scheme perspective. But what are your thoughts on him? Do you think he's someone who's worthy of that first round grade, or do you think he's someone that should be sort of nearer the sort of pick 50 kind of range?
You mentioned the size, and he has got NFL size. I really like Kaiir Elam. I thought he might go back to Florida. I thought he needed this year to develop, and he battled He battled through injuries this season. So I thought he might go back and take another year to develop. He has got the potential to be a first-round cornerback. I just think potentially in this class, he might not quite make that grade.
No, I exactly the same thinking. Cool, it's good to know. Dan, have you got any questions from our draft expert here?
Yeah,
any players you'd be keeping an eye on that you want to?
No, it's too early for me. Outside the generics of what everybody's on about, mentioning and seeing, I haven't started to dig. So, I guess my question would be: you mentioned obviously a lot of names throughout the show, Oliver, but who's the one guy that's not getting that media hype and buzz? Who is that one name at any position that? Man, actually, let's change that. Who's the one guy at a skill position for fantasy purposes that we should actually be looking at going under the radar so far?
Fantasy purposes. To be honest, Malik Willis is the guy you want to be considering for fantasy purposes, I guess, just because of he's probably going to end up at a team where they're going to start him. He's going to rely on he's going to have to rely on his legs, and obviously any quarterback that's a dual threat is going to be a worthwhile investment from a fantasy perspective. We've mentioned Christian Watson on this podcast a couple of times, and he's again. From a fantasy perspective, he's a guy who can carry the ball out of the backfield. Same as Treylon, but people are hyping up Treylon Burks, and he for the reasons of he can rush, he can receive, he's going to add yards after the catch. He's probably going to land with an offense that uses him creatively, kind of like Deebo Samuel. So those sort of guys. Murf mentioned Calvin Austin. Obviously, similar guy who can do a lot of similar things out of the backfield as well as a pass catcher as well.
Okay, I wrote all them down, so we'll be sorted.
I think there's some good players. I think this is. I wrote about this today. I did a rookie mock draft for Fantasy Pros and said for fantasy purposes around about pick 20 is when you start to see this. Say drop off. I don't think there's this strong consensus 101 like we've had in recent years in fantasy football. I think there's a lot of guys at the top. The one thing that stuck out to me when I did the mock was a lot of wide receivers early, middle, and late. It shows you just how deep this is. There's so many wide receivers. I got Calvin Austin in the 4th round, so that would have been pick 41, so which I think is better than the 41st best offensive player in this class. Likely was going after that, I think. Where did Likely go? And I Likely went at the 411, so he went as the 47th player off the board, which again, I think he's better than that. I didn't take him because I'd already taken Trey McBride and didn't need 2 tight ends. But I think that's late. And I think, draft capital will change all of this. It was a fun exercise to do. But having gone through and done a mock, it was interesting to see. So to break this down, the first 2 rounds, only one quarterback was taken. That was Malik Willis. He was taken at the 209. And then the others all came off the board. I'd say the others. Sam Howell fell into the 4th round, but the rest were taken in the 3rd round. But some interesting picks here. And obviously this doesn't reflect the combine. With Christian Watson went at a 312. I can't imagine that's going to stay. But it makes you think that, there's some good players here. Sky Moore was a 3rd round pick. Tyler, I always butcher his name. I'm really sorry. Algilia from Brigham Young University. I love him. He went mid-3rd. Damian Pierce went 4th round. Again, I think he could do a job for players. So I think when you do the mock, you actually realize there is a bit more talent on the skill positions than perhaps you would think. And especially at tight end. I can't remember ever seeing 4 or 5 tight ends come off in a 5-round mock. So it tells you how good that class is. But a lot of wide receivers. A
lot of good pass catching tight ends in this class.
Yeah. So it's good. I hope people have enjoyed this breakdown. It's been phenomenal. We got over, but do you know what? You dropped a lot of knowledge. If people have more questions, where can they find you, Ollie, and interact with you and read your work as well?
Okay, so you can find me on Twitter at OJ Hodgkinson. And if you go to profootballnetwork.com, you'll find all the draft analyst stuff that we're doing through this process. And as I said at the top of the show, you can find an opportunity to put your name and email address in and get a link ready for when the NFL draft guide drops, which I believe is next Sunday, the 13th of March.
Nice.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, for educating Dan and I. And Dan's probably got a notepad full of names now. But no, I think it's good, not just from a fantasy perspective, but wanting to give some love to some non-fantasy players to keep an eye on, because everyone now is watching and going to start watching draft content and get into it. So let's give them some names that they can go and take away. And I think those who've taken some names are going to watch some tape and make some good notes. So I think everyone got a little bit smarter, which we appreciate very much, Ollie, and wish you the best of luck, and hope we can get you back on maybe after the draft and analyze it all.
Cheers. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Cheers, Oliver.
See you later.
And for everyone else, Rush Nation, don't forget, check out the rest of our content. You can find it all over the website. And we look forward to having you on the journey. We've got a great set of guests coming up in recent weeks. I'm very excited for some of the guests that we've got coming on.
Me too.
I'm very excited for next week's guest. I haven't shared it with you, Dan, but it's someone that I got it all sorted today. It's someone who's going to take us on a bit of a journey to go from a fantasy football newbie to someone who won leagues and is going to share some stories as to what information was useful, how to fade the noise, etc. And then from there, we've got some amazing people coming on in the coming weeks. I'm really pleased and humbled to have the kind of roster that we have. So, what's going on UK FFC wise? Anything more news?
We announced last week that we have Matt Cullen, our first panelist, announced. He's joining us. Those of you who don't know who Matt is the commissioner for the JTT Cup, the Jonathan Tarrant Trust. He was kind enough to give us the very last entry spot into the competition. So there's a thing out on our Twitter right now. Mouse fell off his chair almost.
No, the mic. I stood on the lead and the mic fell off.
Like and retweet and do what it says on there, and see if you can nick that last spot. I believe we've got another panelist being announced tomorrow, so keep your eyes peeled to @_UKFFC. And if you haven't already, go get your tickets. There are not too many left now. It's selling out far better than we actually anticipated. It's great to see.
Amazing. So check that out. Check out the profiles going up on the website. Check out the Dynasty guys. They're here tomorrow. And we will be back next week with a stellar guest. But until then, Rush Nation, as always, don't forget, keep rushing.